All right, Mayor, we can begin.
Okay, this special meeting of the City Council is called to order. Would you call a roll, please?
Yes, Mayor Studebaker.
Here.
Councilor Mans.
Here.
Kohlhoff.
Here.
O'Neill.
Here.
Nguyen.
Here.
Lamont.
Here.
And Wendland.
Here.
And also joining at the meeting today are Martha Bennett, City Manager, David Powell, City Attorney, Anne Marie Simpson, City Recorder, Megan Phelan, Assistant City Manager, Ivan Anderholm, Parks and Recreation Director, Don Johnson, Fire Chief, and Dr. Ritu Sani, our Medical Director.
First item of business is to approve a resolution to extend the emergency power for the city manager. So I'll make a motion that we extend that.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, would you call a roll?
Mayor Studebaker,
Yes.
Councilor Mans,
Yes.
Kohlhoff,
Yes.
O'Neill,
Oh, skip. Didn't go through.
Councilor O'Neill,
Yes.
and Nguyen,
Yes.
Lamont,
Yes.
Wendland.
Yes.
And so the motion passes 7-0.
Okay, next, city manager, you're going to give us an update?
Yeah, so I thought what we'd do today, if it's all right with you, is I appreciate Dr. Sani joining us again. I think you all know the governor sent out the framework for reopening Oregon in some detail last week. And the first part of that framework is essentially the technical issues related to the virus. The gating criteria was what I was hopeful that Dr. Sani could answer for you. But I've also asked him some specific questions because the reopening not only requires this medical criteria to be met, but will happen in phases. Phase 1 will be a certain category of businesses and group gatherings. Phase 2, slightly larger, and then phase 3, some larger gatherings after that. And so I thought it'd be great if we could hear from Dr. Sani about what that might imply for summertime events in Lake Oswego. And then after you get done talking with Dr. Sani, I'd like to have Megan talk about the types of questions and issues that we're working through at the staff level that would govern reopening decisions at our various facilities and services. And then last but not least, certainly not least in terms of the email traffic that we're all getting, I'd like to have Ivan give you a quick update about what's going on with the parks, including the community gardens decision. Is that all right? Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, so Dr. Sani, could you just talk through the gating criteria and then sort of the 3 phases?
Yeah, I've got a presentation that was given today at the EMS Council, about 5 slides. So, and the last slide does kind of address that. So what I'd love to do is just kind of run through this real quick. If that's all right. Y'all can see my screen, looks like. Yeah, like I said, this is like 5 or 6 slides, about 5 minutes or so. Oh, there's a bike outside my house. As Dr. Fauci said, you don't make the timeline, the virus makes the timeline. And I think that the real point of emphasis on this is that, we have data and we have sort of some theory or ideas about what could or might happen. At the end of the day, we're going to need to be flexible and nimble because we really don't know what's going to happen, and we're going to need to. There is certainly the possibility of having to act relatively quickly, like we did in mid-March, to sort of to keep everybody safe. And the idea that we're just going to sort of progress slowly through this thing while it's on a straight line, while I think we all hope that's what happens. I think it would be sort of naive to think that that's kind of how it's going to go. On the Clackamas County website, you can see this dashboard, which looks at all 3 of our main counties, plus Yamhill County, kind of in aggregate. You can also go on the website and see the you can look at it per county rather than the aggregate. There's also some data on that website about testing and the percentage of positive tests and things like that, which I think people find interesting. You can see it looks like we've sort of peaked a little bit. Interestingly enough, right around 2 weeks after we started some of the stricter guidelines, which makes a lot of sense. But if you look at sort of the last week, the number of cases in the region is still a little bit higher than it was the week before. So we're not necessarily into the point of kind of free fall or falling numbers just yet. In Clackamas County, these are the numbers. There were 205 total cases, 7 deaths. This was as of yesterday. This was our EMS council. So of the 205 cases, 13 had been transported to the hospital by ambulance. And we also have 3 long-term care facilities in Clackamas County that are reporting cases. And those are of some special concern because in those environments we are worried that there could be more rapid spread of the virus. This is just an overview of kind of the Clackamas County the Clackamas County Emergency Operations structure that's been in place since the end of February. These are all the different sort of branches. Most of this is happening virtually. So even though you see a lot of sections and people involved, they're actually probably either working from home or in certainly adequately social distancing. So it's not just all about kind of managing the virus itself, but we're managing PPE for EMS and other healthcare providers, also looking at our at-risk populations such as veterans, seniors, and the houseless, working on those who are also behavioral health issues and things like that. So it's a pretty far-reaching and structure that's in place. And then the kind of the real meat and what you guys have a lot of questions about is what's been released as the governor's framework for reopening Oregon. And I think the most important thing to understand is we got to have a lot of pieces in place to then sort of move forward. And then the idea is to move forward in stages, looking at sort of 2-week blocks of time, potentially even longer, in order to see if there's any sort of significant increase in infections that are being reported. The key kind of, I think one of the indicators we're looking for is a sort of very strong downward trend in cases over 14 days. And we still haven't quite hit that threshold yet. I think a few days ago had a big day of positive tests, for instance. Tracing and disease investigation is really important. This is the kind of thing I like to refer to as good old-fashioned public health, but this is what public health does every day. And as an example of the 203 cases that I noted, every single one of those has had a contact tracing and disease investigation by the county public health. But we still need to increase that capacity. And so all 3 counties are working in tandem on how to increase that capacity. Because the idea is going to be that, we're still going to see cases. And when a case pops up, is to sort of try to aggressively identify that case and identify those contacts so that we can evaluate their risk for passing on the disease. And so increasing that capacity is going to be key. Obviously, PPE is also going to be important. So until we're strongly convinced that we have enough PPE in the hospitals and pre-hospital environment and our care facilities as well as our clinic facilities, that would be another criteria. And then what they're calling robust testing, but planning to be able to, along with the contact tracing, it says contract, I just noticed there's a typo, but being able to utilize testing rapidly, efficiently, and allowing for the community to have rapid access for testing. They're working right now very closely with the hospitals on surge capacity. One of the things that's happened is that we have a lot of capacity in our hospitals right now. But that's as the hospitals start working their way back into regular business and they're moving slowly, they're allowed to do some elective procedures starting Friday. My understanding is most of them won't start till Monday, and the the hospital facility where I work says they're not even going to be at 50% by the end of May, just because they're mostly concerned about having sufficient PPE. And then finally, the governor, of course, is now signed on with an agreement with California, Washington, Oregon, that's us, Colorado, and Nevada to move sort of in conjunction. And I think that that's the other sort of reinforcement on that, is that this is ultimately kind of the governor's decision. So those are that's the quick kind of overview framework. From a timeline perspective, you guys saw some of that draft work last week. There are work groups set up around meeting all of these goals. And those work groups are still working. So we're not even at a point where those work groups have come back to the executive branch and made presentations or identified what they have available. That is what I have. Let me figure out how to how to unshare this. All right, or maybe not. Okay, here it is. Stop sharing. All right. So that's what I had prepped, but whatever you guys have, please.
Okay, we got some questions. Let me ask one first and I'll get the other ones. In any of this, does the economics come into any of it, Doctor? Because there are people who are staying at home, as you know, that are healthy physically, but economically they're dying. And I'm just wondering how long we can continue to do this and destroy the economy in the process.
Well, certainly I'm not an economist or understanding and can't necessarily speak to that. As a public health physician, though, I certainly understand the economic impact on wellness and healthiness. I know the governor has not only set up, asked public health to create work groups around the gating criteria, the governor is also working, has created industry-specific work groups to work on, to try to determine the best way to move forward. I think one of the things too is that I think businesses now should be planning on how they're going to provide for business in a safe and sort of a safe environment. So putting those engineering controls in your facility so that people are protected if there's a lot of interaction with the public. How are you going to set up your office so people can maintain 6 feet social distancing? Because I can tell you that as businesses come online, there is still going to be the expectation that we do continue to work hard to prevent transmission of the virus. So I know the governor in her work is taking into account the economic impact of this. And again, I know as public health physicians, we understand that economics plays an incredible role in patient outcome and health and healthiness.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Lamont, you had a question?
Yes, can you drill down a little further? I think I'm following up the mayor's question because I talked about 8 business people and property owners yesterday and today. And I think it's unclear what the state, county, and city is actually saying to a business. So for example, a couple of residents who have businesses right outside the city have said they're going to do a soft opening, skeleton crew, not a lot of people in their waiting rooms, when they have a clinic or whatever. And I think they're kind of making it up on their own. The biggest thing I found was their trouble with this federal loan program, which is not really what we have to deal with there, but they're having trouble getting clarification, realistic timelines, transition timelines for their loans. But the actual opening, whatever your business is there a specific that's coming out of the governor's office that we're giving the businesses on what to do for a first 2-week transition?
I think that that's a key part of what the governor's task groups that are industry specific are going to work with. So I know, for instance, she has a restaurant specific work group, and that they're going to try to come up with the best way to move forward, understanding that the physician-y types like me are going to talk about the fact that this virus still exists in our community, that we still have to do what we can to reduce transmission. And the governor has said in her work group or in her that if we seem to see a huge spike that's going to cause problems, we could step back. But I think businesses should start planning around social distancing and safety. But I think the very specific guidelines per industry are going to come out of the governor's office and her work groups.
So here's an example. So we just approved a 2-week extension into May, mid-May. Some businesses I talked to, they're going to start going May 1st with a soft opening. So I'm not sure if they're just starting the transition to get going and they're going to be all right, or are they going to be told you can't do it according to the governor's order? That's the confusion.
Well, I think the key is that the governor's executive orders are in place now. None of them have been changed. And so if they're running a business that's on the list of businesses that are not permitted, they probably shouldn't. And I'm the doctor, right? But I mean, I think the key is that the executive orders have not been changed yet. And the governor is working with both the healthcare side, the public health component, as well as industry to try to figure out the best way to move forward.
Ma'am, you had a question?
I had a couple of questions. I'm going to seg back to medical things for a moment.
Good.
Hello, doctor. My first question is, we talk about testing, and anecdotally, Oregon has not tested as much as other locales for whatever reason. What does robust testing mean in order to move this process forward? And in addition to that, how does antibody testing, which we hear a lot about, play into that robust testing?
So I didn't write these slides, so I think robust testing is a good word for, I think, testing that we feel like is adequate.
Right.
I think that some of our work, especially in the contact and tracing group, is, I think to the point where they feel comfortable that they have enough testing available to be able to move quickly. So I think it's a very kind of nitty gritty kind of, feel like we have enough in place? And that's the kind of stuff they're trying to figure out now, is what does that mean? We don't recommend right now testing asymptomatic people. But as we move into more contact tracing, we certainly can see a role for, if we have a patient that's identified, testing work contacts as an example to see if any of them test positive, even though they don't have any symptoms. So we definitely are planning to move in that direction. And I think a lot of it kind of depends on us having availability to do that. There is testing, the amount of testing in the system, if you kind of amalgamate everything, private labs, hospitals, public health, has definitely increased. The turnaround times have increased. I think you're going to see more and more partnerships around how to get these testing done. OHSU, Legacy, and Providence have all partnered with public health and are providing testing for our frontline folks as needed, primarily OHSU and Legacy. I think you're going to just continue to see public health work with their resources to figure out the best, what that threshold is for robust testing. Now, with regards to antibody testing, this is a very interesting topic. The reality is that there are a lot of antibody tests out there. And, it's been described by some, I was in the medical advisory group talking to some of the Oregon lab folks, and they said there's a lot of garbage out there in terms of antibody testing. A lot of these were moved through very quickly. Some of them say in really fine print along the bottom that there's cross-reactivity with other coronaviruses. Well, we know there are at least 2 coronaviruses that happen seasonally every year. They have actually a relatively mild respiratory illness associated with them. So if there's cross-reactivity with those, that's not particularly helpful. There are some tests that seem to be pretty helpful, but the other caveats on antibody testing are twofold. one, we don't know what having antibodies yet means yet. And that's really a big issue is IgG, which are the antibodies that provide long-term protection. We're not sure whether coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 IgG actually provides long-term protection. And until we can figure that out, I think the role of antibody testing could be somewhat limited. And then the other piece is that if you have a pretty highly performing test, but low frequency of the disease or item you're looking for in your population, you can still have a significant number of false positives. And so it's not as straightforward as just doing an antibody test and saying, yes, you have it. Given that what we think the prevalence is today, and that's just a huge guess, a positive antibody test is still about 50-50, whether it's actually a true positive or false positive.
Interesting. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Councilman Nguyen.
Thank you, Doctor. I had a question about face coverings, for example. I know that in some locales, they've suggested that there's people in the community should be wearing face coverings when out in public. And I know that some grocery stores, for example, are requiring that customers that walk in the store wear a face covering. What are you seeing at the state level? Are you seeing any conversations about that? And that's part of that will probably included in the new phase 1 of the opening up the business. Are you seeing more conversation about that?
I'm not sure that I have heard that specific conversation. So I'm not, I want to say I've seen some stuff, but I don't have the answer readily available. I'm happy to look into it though.
Councilman Wendland.
As always, thank you for your updates, Doctor. They're fun and exciting to get information from a true source. So one of the things that I had a question, and I asked you before, is the PPE. When you say robust things, are you, from your system overview, are manufacturers starting to get things to you now? Is it still at a crisis level, or are we getting better?
I think it's dependent on the individual PPE item. We've done some things in our system on the EMS side to make PPE more readily available, particularly in the masks. So we've moved to reusable masks wherever we can. So Lake Oswego Fire and AMR are both in reusable masks, as an example. And that certainly reduces the burn rate, if you will, on mask use. We still see a shortage of gowns. When we look at kind of a system-wide piece, I would say the last time I asked somebody and heard an update, we're probably still only got a couple weeks worth of gowns in the system from an EMS perspective. Now, a number of folks have gone to reusable items for gowns also, reusable Tyvek suits, but that's not usable for everybody, especially if you're having to drive an ambulance, because you have to decon the Tyvek suit before you get in the driver's compartment, which you can't really do if the patient's ill enough. And so for the ambulance and transport side, it's harder to deal with a Tyvek suit versus a simple kind of tearaway gown. And so I think that's the bigger challenge is gowns. We seem to be okay with gloves, and all of our face gear, our goggles and face protectors are reusable. I talked to one of my friends who's a surgeon in another facility. And so this is hearsay at best, but they're hearing some of the same thing in terms of ramping up their ability to do surgery at the hospitals is the gowns being kind of the stumbling block. So there's still, I think, a lot of work to do and continued coordination that has to happen.
So do you think from the standpoint of having dental practices and doctors' offices and things open up, we shouldn't count on them being able to do that because they may not be able to get PPE and kind of get their supply stream in motion?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that it's going to still be a kind of source by source kind of thing to see who's able to source PPE and not. Public health is working with public health is working directly with EMS agencies and with the public health clinics and long-term care facilities to try to source as much PPE. But then when you talk about this other layer, I think you're going to see probably some variation of availability of PPE materials.
And then when you talked about tracing, I mean, do we have the capability to do it on a pretty big scale, or is that going to be a stopping point?
So they've done on every one of our 203 cases, they've actually done a contact tracing. They increased staffing to be able to do it now. And then the Tri-County area is talking about sharing resources, pooling resources, and increasing resources. So I know from my direct boss, Philip Mason Joyner, who's the operations manager at Clackamas County Public Health, that there are plans in place to increase staffing to be able to do that on a regional level.
Any other questions? As usual, Dr. Sani, thank you for all your information. Thanks for all you're doing.
So, Dr. Sani, I don't want to let you go before I ask you the mass gatherings question.
Yes.
I know that the way that the governor's plan works, that after phase 1, they'll look, it'll go for 2 weeks, and then we'll review the gating criteria again, and that'll make a decision about phase 2, and then that'll go for at least 2 weeks, and there'll be another pass through the gating criteria into phase 3, which is the only time when you could have an event of more than 50 people under the current thinking. So obviously we're in the middle of planning for summertime concerts, and
Sure.
we often have a parade and blow stuff up on Independence Day, and I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that. And I think you know that we plan because we can't afford to not plan, but we also want to be realistic about what we're telling folks about those events.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about flexibility. This is my personal opinion, and I think I shared this with you. Is I think it would be pretty aggressive to think that we'd be permitted to have mass gatherings by the 4th of July. I think it's pretty realistic to think that we won't be there yet. We just don't know what's going to happen. But I think I would be pretty shocked if we would be able to have a couple thousand people in one place by the 4th of July.
Thank you. I think that kind of straight talk is hard to hear, but we appreciate it a lot. So I agree with the mayor. You are so amazing to listen to, so clear, and on such a topic that is difficult to understand and explain. I really appreciate your time, and it's really a delight to get to work with you.
Well, thank you. I enjoy working with all of you except for Chief Johnson.
Okay. Thanks for your input. We're going to have to agree with you. Okay, what next?
Okay, so what I'd like to do is have Megan just run through the types of issues that we have to work through at city facilities. And I also want to be realistic here that we are weeks away from decisions about what we're going to do about opening or reopening the city facilities that are in buildings. We may have a conversation about those outdoor things like parks sooner, but it's going to be a while before we're going to have free public access in our buildings. But I thought you might want to at least know what the issues are that we're trying to work through.
All right.
Thank you, Martha. Hello, Mayor and members of council. The EOC continues to meet at least weekly, and this week we did kick off our discussions with regards to how we can do some engineering controls, like Dr. Sani mentioned, to ensure that we maintain proper social distancing not only as employees begin to return to work at whatever time frame that is, but also up until including we open back up to the public. So some things we discussed this week would include, for example, putting shields in place at all of our front counters. As you're familiar with our City Hall building, we have several of those, sometimes multiple front counters on the same floor, as well as at the library and some of our Parks and Rec facilities. So we'd be looking at installing those. We're going to be looking at setting capacity limits for conference rooms and maybe even some of our buildings just in general. We're looking at the flow, how people will enter our facilities. Should we consider one-way routes? I think you may have seen that pop up at grocery stores and other businesses that are currently providing public services. Looking at making sure we have floor decals and super really good, clear, and professional-looking signage to make it really easy for both staff and visitors to follow so that they know where to stand when they're waiting, where they can sit in a conference room to maintain social distancing, and all those things. We're also looking at evaluating our high-touch spots where things get touched frequently. So when people open and close doors, elevator buttons, we're looking at ways by which we could create some sort of barrier that's easier to clean, perhaps, that we can clean more frequently. With keeping in mind that we don't want to ruin the equipment. So we're looking at ways to do that as well. Also looking, again, we have a lot of staff working remotely. We will continue to do that. But looking at staggering staff schedules for various departments as needed to ensure that, again, we're keeping minimum contact as much as possible. So you'll see those changes evolve over time. We'll be working with Scott Wachter and Dr. Sani as well as we develop our list of things we want to address. We're maintaining that on a pretty detailed spreadsheet so we can track our progress and certainly any expenditures related to that, so that we can make sure that when we're ready to be open, that we can do so safely. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, anybody? Good job, Megan.
Thank you.
Megan's rocking it on the EOC. So, yeah. Okay. And now the moment we've all been waiting for. Ivan, can you give us an update on what's going on with the parks and what our thinking is about parks?
Thank you. So, yes, I can. Hopefully everybody can hear me clearly.
Yep.
Okay. So what we're thinking on parks, we've had a lot of communications with the other departments in our region and in close proximity. So not only are we talking about the physical facilities that we have, but we're also talking about event planning, looking at the horizon, looking into the summer and those things. Obviously, the 4th of July is on kind of the front of everybody's mind when we're looking at a large event. What Dr. Sani said, which was reiterated by Manager Bennett, is right in the front of our mind too, that probably not going to be in a place where we can do something on the 4th of July. What we do want to do, though, is we want to be cautious that we're coordinating with our neighboring communities in the region so that the decisions that are made are more of a collective decision so that we don't overburden any one community. So those conversations are still going on. We are planning on having a conversation about LO 4th of July next Thursday. We will have public safety involved as well as the Lake Corporation. And we'll have a fairly robust discussion about what our planning and our messaging will be moving forward at that time. And again, that also gives us time for coordination with our neighboring communities. As you know, we went beyond the executive order on some of our closures in order to further promote the Stay Home, Save Lives executive order. So in that regard, what we're looking at from a perspective is obviously those things that are mandated to remain closed by the executive order will do so until such time the executive order is lifted or amended. However, some of the other services, and I think everyone on the council is aware, community gardens, maybe dog parks, maybe golf course, some of these other things that were not necessarily mandated, but we did our best to ensure the safety of our community and close those. We are working on plans to amend those.
Yes.
So first and foremost, the community gardens. I did want to talk to council about this. We did lift those and allowed limited access. We've been monitoring the response of the community gardeners as well as listening to our on-site staff and what they're observing and their conversations they're having with the community gardeners. I do have to say that community gardeners have been a great partner in the reopening and have done everything that we've asked them to do and have been very helpful in suggesting other things that can happen, and we really haven't seen any issues. It's actually gone as smooth as possible. So with that in mind, and knowing that this is the prime season for gardeners to get into their gardens, and listening to what the response is and listening to what our on-site staff feel is appropriate, what we'd like to do on this upcoming Friday, and this was a 2-week kind of a gating to see how they would do. We're suggesting that we actually open the gardens up basically 7 days a week, still keeping in place the odd and even day that corresponds with your plot, so that we'll never have any more than half the garden plots occupied on any day. Gardeners are allowed to come to the farm. We will be monitoring parking through the process that we've had in place the last 2 weeks. We've actually issued parking passes that are placards that have to be on dashboards for cars that enter. We'll continue to monitor people as they come in and out of the farm. Our monitoring will include our on-site staff that are there, our park ranger, and then we are continuing to do social distancing monitoring, and that is one of the sites that we do Thursdays through Sundays from 3 to 7 p.m. So we have some monitoring in place there. Again, the other restrictions that we would have on the gardens and suggestions that we would have are going to stay in place. The only one that we would lift is we will allow gardeners, because they won't have to sign up and they won't be limited to 2 hours. We are going to allow them to bring in water, beverages, and food so that they can hydrate and get some nutrition while they're there. Some of our gardeners do spend 6 to 7 to 8 hours a day in their garden. So we don't want to deprive them of that. We think this is a manageable next step for us. It does take into account a lot of the comments that we received from the gardeners and also from our staff on recommending to do this. So are there any questions about the community gardens?
Martha, you're going to have to console me.
Until Kim comes back, I'll direct my question quickly. Is if there are plots that are lying fallow because people don't want to come and maintain them who've already purchased them, do we have a mechanism in place, or other community gardens or gardeners or the CSA can plant those so that we have that food for the ACC or for those who may need it later on? Has that been considered?
That's a conversation we've had with our on-site staff and also with our maintenance staff. So our general response to that, we haven't yet released any of those plots or had the communication with the people that may have those, that may anticipate coming. So we can have that conversation, but generally what we do with the fallow plots around this time of the year is we do have a process in place if they lay that way, that we actually come in with our staff and we till those, at least to keep the weeds those types of things down. So we do have something in place, but we will continue to have communication. And as you're aware, we will continue to be communicated to about repurposing those lots. So we're definitely listening, and we're definitely reacting to the realities out of the farm.
Perfect.
Hey, Ivan, this is Scott.
Councilor O'Neill and then Councilor Wendland.
Ivan, one of the things that'll be helpful, and that I've been a long time gardener up there, and the 2 times I've been up there in the last 2 or a week and a half, there's more city staff cars using up all the parkings for people to separate. So if we can get those city trucks and cars out of where people want to park or need to park, I think that would be very helpful. I mean, I think I was up there, there wasn't one person. I was there at 3 o'clock. I think I called Jackie last Wednesday or Thursday. Not one person in any of the gardens, but there were 7 or 8 cars in the parking lot. So
I'll pass that on to our staff, and I know that we have some dead vehicles that are there, not dead, but they're vehicles that are used for special events, and we have a couple pickups that are city vehicles. So we'll make sure that those are not taking up valuable spots. And I'll also talk to you. We do still have staff that are reporting to the farmhouse, both farm staff and then other administrative staff that are doing that. But I'll definitely pass that message on and make sure that we're keeping as many parking spaces. I did want to say also that the gated entry will remain the same. However, it'll be barricaded with signs that basically say, community garden use only. Please have your placard on display.
So I'm next, Madam President. Is that correct? Oh, okay, thank you.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Well, I want to commend the gardening group. I think they were a wonderful group to test policy on, and I think they'll do very well in the new program. And I guess my urging would be to do the same thing with the golf course and with other things, put them on a trial basis, see if we can. I really think our community has got this social distancing down pretty well. I don't think we're going to be like Florida, where all of a sudden you're going to have 100,000 people on the beach overnight. I think Lake Oswego residents are smart, and I think we need to give them some steps so they can stay smart. And then with the right signing and the right guidance, if they get out of control, then we pull them back. But I think it's time to start creating some opportunities, because as the weather continues to get better and people have been quarantined for longer time periods, we're not going to just flip the switch and have everything happen all at once. I think in steps is wise, and I think the garden strategy worked out great. And the gardeners that I've talked to are pragmatic and very practical people, but of course they're gardeners. So that's not to say people at a dog park are going to be quite the same, but I do believe people are starting to get this social distancing thing down. So I would encourage the city of Lake Oswego to do what we can up to the executive order from the governor, and do it in steps with a lot of, whatever, your guidance. Don't make it too complicated, but with your knowledge of how to do things, I would just suggest going in that direction. So.
Councilor Kohlhoff.
Along the same lines, the only thing I had heard was that if something wasn't permitted within what we had as our guidelines 2 weeks ago, then it wasn't permitted. In other words, instead of interpreting the whatever it is that we put out, let's call it the plan, our parks plan, perhaps we can say now going forward, we'll interpret it in a reasonable way so that if it fits within the spirit, just like Councilor Wendland is talking about, it fits within the spirit of what we're trying to achieve, then it should be okay, even though it's maybe not specifically spoken of. I like the idea also of the staging, whatever the proper term is, to allow people to use the dog park and play the golf. It's definitely starting to get to people, and this would be tremendous.
Councilor Lamont?
I agree. I think we're pretty good at self-managing. I think our gardeners, as John said, were really great to show what they can do, and they can do more of it. So I'm getting a lot of questions and pressure about the parks, and obviously then eventually Little League, and then 4th of July, etc. So I'm thinking the same thing. Can we open up the parks, see how people self-manage? Obviously, our ranger and police can stop and say, hey, you're conglomerating or assembling, and that's not right. But maybe then later we can tell Little Leaguers and all that, it would be later down the road. But I think golf, fishing, hiking, park, playing in the park and stuff, I think those are things that we're kind of ready for a soft opening.
So I'm going to have Ivan talk about the golf course in just a second. I think that what we've learned over the last 6 weeks is that what we need to do is make sure our decisions are in coordination with our surrounding jurisdictions. I know West Lynn unilaterally decided to close the boat ramps, and so all the boat ramps in the region that were open got hammered because one community made a decision and didn't contemplate the downstream impacts. So I think your philosophy about a soft opening where we slowly relax is exactly what we're thinking about, but I think you just need to hear me say out loud, we need to do it in coordination with our partners in Portland, state parks, because we got a big state park on our north border, City of West Lynn, so that we don't end up either shifting a burden to them or taking their burden in a way that means that our local residents don't get to enjoy the benefits of the decisions that we've made. So I hope that all makes sense to you.
Are we getting close though? Because I think as Councilor Wendland said, we're getting a lot of pressure to.
I know you are. I know you are. And I think on parks, you are probably getting close on some things because I think state parks will probably be making some announcements next week. I'm sure you saw that Washington State Parks is going to be announcing some reopenings next week. So some things I think you'll start to see loosen up in the next couple of weeks. Some things, though, I like playgrounds and hard sports courts, I think are going to stay the way they are for a few more weeks. So I think you're going to see some shifts, but I don't think you're going to see a dramatic shift back to the way it used to be. Also, I think Ivan should talk about, I think youth sports have all the league teams have canceled for the summer, haven't they? And so if people can use a ball field, it'll just be for them to use a ball field, not for them to play a game.
So let's clarify that, because I think some of our neighbors and a couple of our Little League leaders are still thinking they're going to open up. If it's canceled, we got to really be clear about that. Because I think being in the stands, you can spread out 6 feet, but the day-to-day in the dugout with the kids, it doesn't happen. So
I think they canceled. So Ivan, why don't you talk about that and the golf course and then sort of how we're coordinating with state parks? That'd be great.
Yep. So to answer Councilor Lamont's question, we have our staff that do sports are coordinating with and communicating with the youth sports leagues. What we're finding is that on a national level, like National Little League came out with a declaration about 2 weeks ago that they have canceled essentially Little League sanctioned leagues, everything for the year 2020, and they will be coming back in 2021. So I think that there might be some one-off leagues here locally that are hoping that they can do something later. But our understanding in doing the research and talking to the national bodies and the statewide bodies is that most youth sports, and again, I say most because there may be some that we have overlooked, but most youth sports have actually canceled until September. Their leagues, and they're not planning on having leagues. With that in mind, I'll jump back to the golf course. So we do have a plan that we've developed that we're hoping to implement on essentially the 4th of May, which is next Monday, where we would open the golf course back up. There's going to be some restrictions to how people can sign up. We're going to keep the clubhouse essentially closed with the exception of access to the restrooms. We're going to use the windows that are on the golf course side. We'll use one of those windows as basically the payment window, but we're going to be encouraging people to do online tee times. They can phone in and do tee times, but we will have a window open. We're going to do like many of the courses in the metro area where we only accept card payment at this time. And then obviously we're going to remove the picnic tables that are around the clubhouse so that we don't have people congregating there, because there's really no way for us to do adequate social distancing. However, we are going to leave benches out on the course. We do understand that our clientele walking an 18-hole par 3 course that is necessary. But we do have a plan in place to staff that and hopefully open for tee times this upcoming Monday. And we're hoping to do that. Moving forward beyond that, because we have some support facilities within our parks are open to walk in. However, we don't have restrooms open. We don't have drinking fountains open. We are anticipating too in the next week or so actually opening some of those facilities, single-use restroom facilities that we know that we can sanitize a couple times a day. And then it also prevents the opportunity for multiple people to be in the restroom and not being able to socially distance. Drinking fountains, to me, drinking fountains are, and if Dr. Sani was still on the line, the CDC and Dr. Sani, they don't present a large risk, but the perception is that they do. And I personally believe that people are going to self-regulate if they want to drink out of a drinking fountain or not. But we are going to make that available. But then moving forward, when we start talking about dog parks and unlocking our athletic fields, I think that it's really important. We have, in effect, with being able to close our parking lots, have kept people, not Lake Oswegans, but people from outside and people regionally from congregating and coming to our parks. So with that, what we really want to do is we want to be careful that we don't just open the floodgates, and we want to make sure that we're coordinating with West Lynn, with Walton, with Tiger, Oregon City, Gladstone, Portland, so that when we do that George Rogers Beach is not the only river access that has a parking lot open. We really want to be careful about that. So we are in conversations with these other municipalities about what their plans are. We're trying to correspond those. I've had personal conversations with Lisa Sumption with State Parks, the State Parks Director, about what some of their plans may be for Tryon Creek. So what we want to do is make sure that we roll those out in a sensible way so that, again, we don't become overburdened or that we're not pushing people into another community. So you're going to see that. I would anticipate that through the month of May, basically resulting in around Memorial Day or after Memorial Day weekend, that all those things that we elected to close for the safety of the community that aren't mandated, that you're going to see those open. You're going to probably see dog park.
Can you hear me? Okay. Is everybody else gone?
I can.
Okay, I can't see you anymore, Ivan. Okay, it's me. It's me.
I can't see anybody but you, though.
I can see several people, and you're still looking good. I I guess my question, Ivan, if you can still hear, on the golf course, the Lake Oswego Country Club put in a system where they have the flags on the holes where it has a base so that you don't hit it in the hole, you just have to hit the pin. And it guarantees that your handicap will go down, and it also keeps people socially distant and you don't touch anybody. So I would suggest, if they don't know how to do that, to contact
Okay,
So we do have a procedure in place, and we're following suit with other regional golf courses for the range.
thanks. And Ivan, thank you for all you and your staff are doing to try and keep this thing under control.
You're welcome.
Anybody else have comments or questions? City manager? Oh, boy.
Can't hear you.
I think that some of our folks have left the meeting to try to rejoin to see if it resets their audio.
We have all our council here.
Yes, you do.
You want to do a sound check? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I hear the mayor. I hear Jackie.
Teresa, can you hear us?
Skip's good.
Teresa?
Teresa's left the meeting.
Okay, John?
I see her. She's still there. I just can't hear her.
I can't hear her. She's it looks like it's buffering on hers. I can't really tell.
Buffering? What do you mean, 90?
What?
I had,
Buffering.
to, I had to go back online and reconnect.
Donna, you in? No, no, John. Well, we may have a majority to close the meeting if we have to.
Yeah, we may. Is Martha still here?
No, Martha, well, it looks like she logged out. She may be logging back in because there's two windows.
There she is.
There she is. Martha, where do you want to go from here?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is all we had for you. I know that Councilor Kohlhoff had an item, and so I hate to lose her item before she she can't hear us.
Councilor Kohoff, can you hear us or?
Can't hear.
No, okay.
Gotcha. I'm on.
Well, I don't think there's anything more you need, city manager.
So I think what Councilor Kohlhoff was going to ask is the DEI task force has had some informal meetings in the last couple weeks, and they have some concerns about the deadline for boards and commissions recruitments being at the end of May while we're still under quarantine. And I think that she was going to make a request that we extend that deadline.
Does anybody have a problem with that?
No, I would agree. I would make a motion to extend the deadline if that were appropriate.
Do we need to
Second.
have a motion?
Second.
Okay, we'll go ahead. Any discussion on this?
So I think with your indulgence, what I'd like to do is actually just talk with Councilor Kohlhoff about when she might propose that the new deadline would be. And then we'll just report back to you at your next meeting next week, or in my Friday email to all of you.
Councilor Wendland, is that?
Yeah, a question about boards and commissions. Are you going to try to do anything to get them to start meeting, or?
I think I shared with you last week that what we're trying to do is stand them up in terms of sort of the order of where we have legal deadlines coming because of the work that they're doing, or where we have some other deadline where there's a business decision, either ours or some other businesses, dependent on their meeting. So for example, the Planning Commission and the Development Review Commission need to start meeting. And so we're working in the month of May to get them standing up. I know the Parks Board needs to start working, and so we're working to get them stood up. And then we'll phase the other boards and commissions after those ones where we have a real business need for them to start working.
I would suggest using Zoom.
I don't make those kinds of decisions, and I would suggest that I know. I apologize for whatever has just happened in our universe.
It happens on all platforms.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
Okay, so Councilor Kohoff, can you hear? Are you back with us?
Yeah.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, I can't mute my, oh, I can. Let me try this. Give me 1 second here. Let's see if I
No, we can hear you fine. Don't mute it.
can hear it. Okay, so that
There you go.
bottom thing doesn't work. So I'll stay real still. And Skip told me to use my phone, so I'm using my computer for audio.
Okay, well, we just made a motion to go ahead and move boards and commissions. And you can meet with DEI and come back with us in a couple of weeks.
You tell me that one more time. You've made a motion to set over the selection of the new boards and commissions. Oh,
To extend it.
I think that is the right decision. Yes, I support that very much. Yeah.
Okay, so any more discussion on that? If not, could you call a roll, please, Ms. Simpson?
Okay, so to clarify, the motion, as I heard Councilor Mann say it, was just to delay the interviews for boards and commissions. Councilor Mann, does that reflect what you intended to say?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And that there was a second there. Mayor Studebaker,
Yes.
Councilor Mans,
Yes.
Polhoff,
Yes.
O'Neill,
Yes.
Nguyen,
Yes.
Lamont,
Yes.
and Wendland.
Yes.
Okay, unanimous, yes, 7-0.
Okay, anything else, City Manager?
That's all we have for you today. Thank you.
Again, oh, wait a minute, Councilor Koloff, you had a question or statement?
Well, I had one other thing I wanted to bring up. Is this the appropriate time?
I don't know, it depends on what you're bringing up.
We might mute you.
Yeah, that's right.
Sure, Sal. So the only thing that I would like to raise as a suggestion is, though, I mean, the initial shock of this, I think, is over. I mean, we recognize that something profound has happened. And we now know that we're not just going to flick the switch and everything's going to be the way it was March 1st. And perhaps that's for even the best. But I would really suggest that now that we've had some experience with whatever it is that it takes to get work now back on board, that Councilor Lamont referred to it as people needing to connect. And I think there is that. But also there's a sense that our community, our boards or whatever advisory groups have a lot to say and are anxious to get things on the agenda that are meaty, that I'm going to sound like Councilor Lamont now. I get a lot of calls and emails, people saying, hey, can we be thinking about these new ideas? Can we talk about it? We've got this opportunity to think and to study issues and not just, only focus on those specific emergency type issues. I respect the fact that up to now, perhaps that's all we really had energy for, but I am hearing now that people need the hope of getting the planning going, and we need to engage. And I think we'll all start to feel a little better. That puts staff, I understand, in a bit of a bind. But for example, and here's one simple thing. We made the determination that we would have a program where we would pay upon a proper procedure some utilities. But every person who's been in very dire financial straits knows that utilities are the last thing you pay because they're not going to be cut off. On the other hand, when Councilor Mans and I, at your suggestion, began to make telephone calls about what all is going on, we heard some, at least I know I did, some very specific needs of the community, an elderly community that may not have but a couple bucks in the bank and have a half a quart of milk in the refrigerator, and other people who have no Wi-Fi was what Melissa Kelly said was like the number one thing. How do you function in this virtual world without Wi-Fi? So my suggestion is that we, take a few of the top needs of people and see, for example, if that utility thing could be expanded, whether or not, some monies could be set aside to deal with those. Vice versa with issues that are on our goals. Let's get talking about those earlier as opposed to later, using this time. And I think that we are ready and energized after the shock of what happened. We're ready to start back. And I believe that people are asking us to give us that hope.
Okay. Point taken. Thank you. Anything else? All right.
Well, I guess can I ask you a question?
Who are you asking?
Everybody. When would it be on the agenda it might be helpful to Councillor Kohlhoff's suggestion to have an update of what our lofty goals were at the beginning of the year, and then maybe City Manager Bennett, you could come back and say, hey, here's my suggestion. These are the top third that we should be working on. This third, we really shouldn't be. And just to kind of get our head wrapped around sort of a mid-course thing. Not next week, but I mean, just in a couple months or whatever.
So I'm happy to do that, but I want to challenge you all to think about what we're about to do as a whole new set of goals. And I know it probably feels like there ought to be a lot of free time, but I have a lot of folks who are spending their days rethinking how we do business, because we're not going to be doing business. It's not so much, they're no longer reacting to we're going to shut things down. They're now trying to plan for, in a new world where we have to orchestrate our lives around making sure that we can stay 6 feet apart until at least there's a vaccine that's universally applied. We're not going to actually conduct the business that we conduct in the same way. And we need to spend our energy making sure we can stand up city services in a way where social distancing is a reality for 12 to 18 months. Let me give you an example. When we first did the plan for what we were going to do when we have the first positive on city staff, and we're going to have a positive on city staff at some point, some of our facilities, their plan was to completely close for 3 to 5 business days so that they can clean the building before they restart again. Well, that works in a conception of COVID where it's going to pass through in a single wave and we're going to get a case or two and then it's going to be gone forever. It doesn't work in a scenario where we're going to have 3 phases or maybe 4 phases of waves of this virus. And so I know it probably feels to folks in the community that we're not doing anything, but it's taking a lot of creativity and energy and innovation to think about how do we do our work in an environment where we're living with this virus for the 18 months it's going to take us before we have some level of mass vaccination available to us. And so I need you all to be as patient as you're capable of being. And to Councillor Kohlhoff's point, I do believe that the thinking that you're doing around what are the real community needs, what's the deep community need going to be, for example, the low-income seniors, I think that's a great thing. The universal broadband idea, how can we get a federal agenda that's really focused on, having the federal government make sure every American has access to broadband if this is a new world that we're going to live in. That's really great thinking, and I hope that you'll do that. But to think that we're going to just resume the work that we were doing on May 7th, I think is probably not such a great way to think about the next 12 to 18 months. And I've talked to you for all about one example of a goal you had on your list that I just think the time's not right to work on, and there'll be other things. But all I'm saying is, as opposed to thinking about how do we restart that work, how do we think about what our priorities need to be in the next 12 to 18 months while we're living with this virus amongst us for a while? Am I making sense? So I think that I'm glad you want to have this intellectual time. It's good. But I ask you to think not about what is the work we planned to do back in January, but rather what's the work ahead, given that we live in this new universe, at least for a couple of years.
So
Well,
let's have that discussion either second meeting in May or the first weekend meeting in June. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Anything else, City Manager? Thank you, everybody. Take care. The meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.